This isn't the final destination of your innovation journey, but it is the next step. Welcome to the Synapse Podcast. All right, guys, welcome back to the Synapse Podcast. Today, I'm excited to share with you, we have two entrepreneurs who are going to walk us through how they are using branding and marketing in their innovation journey. We have with us Rebecca White, who is the James W. Walter Distinguished Chair of Entrepreneurship and the Entrepreneurship Center Director, both at the University of Tampa, and Ian Barkin, who, since we recorded this podcast, has moved on to a new role, but is a 4-time founder, an advisor, and a very successful entrepreneur. You're really going to enjoy this. Ian, take it away.
Thank you to the entire Synapse family for giving us this opportunity. Rebecca and I had discussed beforehand how we were going to structure this, and we thought we would do it in sort of an informal discussion format. We've done this twice before. I had the privilege of being a guest on her award-winning, world-famous podcast, N Factor, and she had joined me on my podcast as well, and we had a great time just having effectively a fireside chat. So we thought we would do it again here. So Rebecca, let's get started.
All right.
So we'll start with effectively the framing, which is that we've been asked to share our insights on branding and marketing, especially as it relates to the entrepreneurial venture and the entrepreneur. We're going to try to cover a few different key themes, including devising your marketing and sales strategy, the pros and cons of either bringing talent in, so hiring from outside the organization, or bootstrapping it all yourself. And then we'll take a quick look at the tools, ROIs, analytics, and maybe some different resources that we've seen or we think might be helpful to the entrepreneur. So Rebecca, I'll get us started with a question. First and foremost, in your role, you have worked with and helped so many aspiring entrepreneurs to get started. Before any of the rest of the topic even matters, the marketing or sales or brand building, the entrepreneur needs to have an idea. They need to get started somewhere. How do you help your students and those you advise to get started and to identify that idea?
Well, thank you for the question, Ian. And as you said, this is fun to be together. I always love our conversations, and I'm excited to be here with Synapse Converge. And as you know, this is one of my favorite topics. I love talking about opportunity recognition because over the years, I've learned that there are a lot of people that want to be entrepreneurs, and there's always searching for an opportunity. And sometimes they get misled and kind of get down the path of something that doesn't really work. And, when you're talking about branding and marketing, it really does begin with the customer always. And the opportunity also begins with the customer. There's a great theory called the theory of jobs. And it's really basically that you as an entrepreneur are doing a job for someone. In the same way, can you get them to hire you? And so when you're thinking about opportunities and recognizing opportunities, it has to start with a customer need. And it has to be more than a customer need of one. So, you got to have, in our program, what we do with our students is we spend a lot of time teaching them how to do research, quite honestly. And, that's not necessarily the fun part. That's the discipline part of all of this. But I can't tell you how many people have come to me and they say, I've got this great idea. Nobody else is doing it. And it takes about 5 minutes to see that problem is being solved by somebody else. So, for me, when you're talking about branding, marketing, opportunity recognition, it always starts with solving a problem. And really digging in to figure out the dynamics of that problem, the complexities of that problem. And that really means knowing your customer, I think. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's kind of where I am. And figuring out the right customer. In the beginning, a lot of times it's figuring out who that first customer is going to be. Right. Because sometimes, that'll change over time. I don't know. What do you think? about
I completely agree. It's funny. I was having a discussion with an old business school colleague, friend of mine last week, and he is the consummate entrepreneur. He's started several different companies. He was a hero to us all when we were at school, and he's continued to do that, starting company after company. And each of them appears to be very different than the one before. And I was intrigued by that. And I was having this discussion with him just last week, and he laid out exactly what you just explained, which is probably more than anything else, he's really nailed that assessment phase of just investigating, interviewing, reaching out, and being a sponge for, in some cases, depending on how long you have to be a sponge, and he's lucky that he's got the time, but would spend months really just listening to prospective buyers to shape what starts as a kernel of an idea in his head, but really takes form with input from other people. Because you're absolutely right. If you've got an idea and no one else is doing it, sometimes there's a good reason why no one else is doing it.
That's right.
Or you really are, you're solving the problem for a very small group of people, and there may not be a viable business model in it to pursue that at scale.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of it is about figuring out whether there is really a market, and everybody, I think, has to remember that a market has to be accessible. It has to be big enough to make sense. It has to be meaningful, really. And
Right.
That's a big part of it. Now, let me ask you, Ian, if let's say we have identified an opportunity.
Yes.
And we are interested in figuring out how are we going to position this to prospective customers? How do we begin after we've figured out an opportunity?
Right. So I'll give some background context. So I've been lucky enough to start 3 different companies in my life, and to varying degrees of success. But all of them emerged from experiences that I had in markets that I was somewhat familiar with. So whether you go through a robust assessment phase like my entrepreneurial friend, or you just are in the right place at the right time, as I found myself several times, and realized that there might be an unaddressed need. What it tends to mean is you've either done your research and your homework, and you've reached out to a bunch of people who are your starter list, or you've been around the industry for a while. And so in my case, I'd been around the industry for a little while, and so that's how I got started, is just understanding. In the nature of the industry I was in, there were industry analysts who studied it, followed it, wrote about it, rated it, 2x2 matrixed it. And there were advisors in the space, there were suppliers, there were your peers and competitors. And so you have to make it your business to build your network always, because you never know when you might want to cash that in. And so I was lucky to do that by reaching out to my analyst and advisor friends, and start to shape the way that we built our brand. And so it was, and sometimes you're putting in the hard work. You're planting seeds for crops you may never harvest, but plant those seeds because you give yourself so many more options in the future if you're doing that. And so that's really what I found. Have you heard different things? How have you seen some of your students who've gone on to great success approach their initial sort of branding and into marketing?
Well, first of all, I think what you said makes a lot of sense. And I think that's while there are a lot of different tools and techniques,
Mm-hmm.
basically the principles stay the same. One of the fun things that we do is we have our students develop a customer archetype, and you've probably done this before, which is it's a lot of fun. I always require them to give them a name and, write about who they are and what they do. And I think, it's what's interesting is that, that can be really informative, and it can be really fun, but it can also be really challenging. And so you can get that wrong. So you always have to keep going back. You have to talk to customers. You have to keep working on it. But I think that really just getting in the head of your customer means, deeply understanding everything about them.
Totally agree. I've rolled my eyes plenty of times at the mention of doing a buyer persona exercise, but they are critical. They're
Yeah.
absolutely imperative to, as you say, and you humanize it by giving them names, by giving them ages, by giving them hobbies. But oftentimes it's a profile that's critical to the way that you craft your message, the channels through which you pipe your message. And so we run them all the time now in my role. Continue to do research all the time to hone and better understand that buyer persona.
Yeah.
Okay, so question for you, Rebecca. So you've got the idea, you've taken the earliest steps on how you're going to be building that brand, and you've got a general sense of who you want to get this message out to. Then the next step is how do you do it? Do you suggest that the founders, the entrepreneurs, take on the burden of this effort? Or do they look outside? Do they look to contract people early on? What's the sort of division of labor that you think is the most successful archetype you've seen in the startup ecosystem?
Great question, Ian. And I'll just do a little bit of a shout out right now, because one of the things that Ian and I did was really ask some of our student entrepreneurs, some who are building companies, if they had any questions they would like to ask. They don't get a chance to ask somebody of Ian's stature this kind of question very often in his experience. So they got really excited about this opportunity, and that was one of the questions they had. So, I'm a firm believer that as a startup, even though it's a great deal of hard work, these are the kinds of things that a startup needs to be intimately involved in. Now, does that mean that you don't get assistance with this? Not necessarily. You need plenty of guidance and input, but there's nothing like listening yourself, hearing yourself what the customer has to say. When I was involved in a startup in Cincinnati, we created a risk mitigation company for higher education. And so basically what we did was we went to a number of different conferences where we were able to talk with the people that would be the buyers and the users of the product that we were developing, so that we could actually start to get in their heads ourselves. Now, I think once you get to a point that you start needing graphic design, you start needing real assistance with branding, there are some amazing branding experts out there that can take what you've learned and really finesse it and turn it into something really exciting. I was on a board for a bank, and we were going through all of this. We talked to customers all the time, but when they went and talked to customers also, they brought back some things that we missed. So I think it's kind of a not either or, but when's the right time? And I think you personally, as a startup, have to get in the heads of your customers. But I think that there are times when you bring people in. So I know that's not a real simple answer, because the next question is maybe how do you know what that timing is? Right. But I don't know how you feel about that. But that's kind of the advice that I give in my own experience.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think there are certain realities in the earliest stages of a startup's life that seem like a struggle and are actually a blessing, and you gotta see them as such. But being cash constrained, being resource light, forces you to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
And in so doing, as you said, you have to gain the intimacy to a market that, first of all, you probably should have had and probably have just by having come up with the idea in the first place. But my last startup, there were 4 co-founders, and I and one of the other co-founders were in WordPress trying to figure out how to build our very first website that was probably with us for too long, but we built it, and we wrote the first content. We were building the graphics, the frameworks, everything else, because you're right. It becomes very real for you when somebody suggests, why don't we just get a ghostwriter to put some of these ideas down? And you do one rev with that ghostwriter, and even if they're great, it's just missing the nuance you're going for, and you realize only we can do this right now. Only we can put this message on paper, and it should fall to us to really go through that hard editorial process of every ounce of our content and our message and the graphics, because then you know what you need. Then there's an element of joy as you're liberated from some of it, and you're able to bring in a team or to afford finally some resources to take it off your hands. But there's something really visceral and valuable about owning every one of those steps at the earliest stages of a startup, and I speak from experience.
Yeah, and that's as I said, our students ask questions, and they're all bootstrapping, and they're all trying to figure out how far that can take them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if do you believe there's a point where where you really know that you can't bootstrap anymore? You got to get money. I mean, you've raised money and been through this path.
Yes, that's hugely dependent on the type of business you're in and luck. So there's a complex equation of luck plus everything else. If you're developing something first, if you build before you sell, then just the equation and the timeline is very different than if you are able to cobble together and build as you sell or build after you sold. So the last thing I built was a consulting firm. And so, as I said, we were able to bootstrap all of the light things, the brochures, the website, the messaging, et cetera, and then go and find ourselves some customers, having confidence in ourselves that we would be able to deliver that which we pitched. If you are starting a software company, you may not be in that same timeline. You need to actually have something, at very least a prototype, before you sell anything, and then you've got to go find resources. And that's from a resource perspective, that's where the nuance of venture capital and private equity and friends and family rounds and all the different levels of fundraising come in. But I still think there's a huge value in bootstrapping as long as possible. Frankly, it's stressful, it's scary, but it's the most valuable thing you can do, because it puts every ounce of future success and resources that you ultimately come into, it puts them in perspective and makes you a really careful shepherd of that which you were then able to harness and apply. However you spend that, if you spend the money on developers, or if you spend it on marketing or sales or branding or promotion or sponsorships with analysts, et cetera, that's be as lean as possible, as long as possible.
I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs on my podcast and in the community and around the country. And what's interesting to me too is how a lack of money leads to creativity. You have to come up with creative solutions. You have to be a creative problem solver. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard entrepreneurs say, I never would have gone to plan B or figured out this unique way to do something if I had all the money I thought I needed in the beginning.
Right.
And so that creativity might lend itself to marketing and branding as well, don't you think?
I completely agree. You and I, in various different discussions we've had, brought up the theme, the concept of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. You just made me think of it there again, which is to be an entrepreneur is to be very exposed and to be very vulnerable at all times, vulnerable to the demands of resources and payroll, to the demands of the market and competitors and everything else. So you need to be very open and very aware of your vulnerability, but use that as a strength. And as you said, be willing to pivot, be willing to realize that plan A, it was a foundation stone that enabled you to find the solid plan B. And I actually know a lot of entrepreneurs, and some of those, I mean, the successful one I referred to at the beginning of the discussion, who are now running very different businesses than the ones they started, because they were attuned, because they continued that assessment, because they were open to being vulnerable and were willing to evolve and shift. So So yeah, so lean, wear lots of hats, be open and comfortable with vulnerability.
Listen to customers, right? That old thing that your mom had, you got two ears and one mouth, right?
That is true. That's absolutely true. So let's pivot to talk about. So we've talked about now. Once you've passed the bootstrap phase, maybe you have some more resources, and there's lots of different tools, technologies available in the market. Are there? And I certainly am sort of drinking from a fire hose always. I feel in my role as I'm trying to figure out all the different just software tools, let alone frameworks and flipping funnels and account-based marketing and all sorts of other things. Are there tools and frameworks and measures that you suggest entrepreneurs keep an eye on, the ones that you think are best serve them as they're getting started with their organization?
Like you, there are so many that it's hard to keep up with all of them. There are some fantastic books out there. There are lots of ways to use, like when I was creating InFactor, I went out and everybody's familiar, I think, with 99 Designs, companies like that can help you do a lot of things. But when it comes to measurement, measurement is always tough. And so I think, once again, measurement, regardless of the tools that you use, I think the framework, the mindset that you need to bring to it is, are people buying my product? So it's a very, it's probably not necessarily the answer that a lot of people want to hear. I have an example of a former student who was building a pretty exciting company in our accelerator. And he loved pitching. And so he always wanted to go to these competitions, and he went to South by Southwest. He's been to a lot of other things. But there was a point where I had to sit down with him and say, you really need to be focused on sales. You've got to get out there, and people have got, that's the ultimate measure of whether it's working. So, if you want to raise money, because he kept wanting to talk to me about raising money. And I said, if you want to raise money, ideally, you're going to have customers using this product. And if people will buy it, that is, in my mind, the ultimate measure that what you're doing is working. So, I'm sure that somebody, that is more in tune to some of the latest software can speak maybe to some brands and some products out there. But from an old-fashioned perspective, I guess, not leaning on any kind of technology, I think the ultimate goal is to get sales. And right now, and we're dealing with this COVID-19 kind of thing, and it's I was sharing in my blog, I was sharing this concept that that one of my friends has, and he calls it the full lake theory. And he said he was driving around San Antonio where he was working, and they had drained a lake, and it was crappy, dirty, yucky, all kinds of stuff at the bottom. And he said, when you've got, he realized that business is like that. When your sales are great, times are good, it can cover up a lot of problems. But, in a time like COVID, for example, when we're dealing with, an empty lake, many of us, it's really hard it's a perfect time really to see what's at the bottom. Yeah. So I guess my point is, I think sales covers up a lot, and you don't want to totally get focused on sales because you've got to understand why you're getting sales at the same time. Right. So the ultimate, I guess, measure is, are we getting sales? And then understanding why and whether it's working and whether people are going to be coming back. Right. So again, I'm going back to research.
Yep. I remember I was riding in a car with a friend of mine 15 years ago who was another entrepreneur and started a company. And I was talking to him about just the complexities of financial spreadsheets and what do you use as a tool to track your business and to keep an eye on it. And he said, well, it's simple. are you making more money than you're spending? I was like, oh, huh, okay. I was really waiting for something much more grand to come out of your mouth than that. But it's funny because that one seems like a good one. There was I had a business school professor who used to somewhat brashly say that cash flow is more important than your mom. And it seemed real rude at the time, but then go start a company and see how you feel about cash flow. So you're right. You do need to focus on just the sort of the hierarchy of survival of an entrepreneur. Is, do you have the resources to keep the lights on, to keep the team going? And depending on the business, again, sometimes you raise a lot and you burn it, and so you're looking at burn rate versus the are you making more than you're spending rate. But you, as you say, you need to be crystal clear on the metric that your survival hinges on. And then an interesting point about the lake theory, it's you got to be really careful as a startup that you don't sort of you aren't less focused on, or you aren't, I guess, informal or laid back about certain processes and setups going into place because you're too focused on one thing. Unfortunately, it's a very hard message to hear, and it's not easy to execute on, but you've really got to be focused on the foundation of all of the pieces going into place in your organization, because you'll find that the way that you communicate or pay or product develop or market or sale or track, all of them a year, 2, 3, 4 years down the line are very much the product of the foundation you put in place in the earliest days of your startup. And we found that from a tracking perspective, specifically as it relates to marketing, we didn't put in a strong CRM system very early because they're expensive, and a spreadsheet can do the same sort of thing. But then we found ourselves without the same sort of robust data that I would have loved to have to start modeling and mapping attribution paths and who we'd interacted with in the past, just to inform the buyer persona exercises we were forced to do sequentially through the processes. Man, I wish we had data from 5 years ago to inform us now. So yeah, that's kind of sort of all over the place in that answer, but I think sort of pay attention to all metrics, lay foundations for all functions, but really emphasize that survival metric.
Yeah, I think, sales has to be number one, but I agree, in your war room, so to speak, you need to outline all those key performance indicators and keep track of that. And that's, like you've pointed out 2 or 3 times during this conversation, it's going to vary depending on the type of business that you're starting. And that's all the more reason maybe to have some mentors and experience in your space. Not maybe, that is all the more reason, I think.
Right. Well, that's an interesting question. Is from as you advise your students who are a team of one at the beginning, and you're giving them tremendous support, and you've got, as you said, you've got accelerators, but early on, hopefully they're not only getting the input of potential buyers, they're getting the support of potential mentors. Is there a classification of mentor sort of advisory board that you advise? Do you go find somebody who's the marketing guru and somebody who's the product guru, or do you just find somebody who's not afraid to tell you like it is?
I would say yes. I think that actually you've kind of outlined probably a pretty good, I think from an advice, first of all, I think having an informal advisory board can be very powerful, especially when you're new in a space or when you're learning, the whole startup experience. It can be distracting as well, because having those people, keeping those people engaged, right, is important and hard work. And so you have to be ready for that. When we help our our companies identify a team of advisors, we do encourage them to find someone who understands the industry deeply. Obviously, someone who understands the product or the space, the technology, maybe some uniqueness. So that might vary a little bit depending on who you are. I mean, what you're doing. But we also encourage marketing. Somebody with a marketing expertise can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's important to have that serious, maybe serial entrepreneur that is willing to deliver the tough message, and then possibly somebody who can help you raise money as well. That's always important. Every CEO, I think, especially if they're growing anything entrepreneurial, has got to be thinking about raising money almost all the time. So, right. Those kinds of, I think that it can be, it's going to be unique to what you're trying to do. But I think 3 people is probably a good number to get started, because there is reciprocity involved in that sort of thing. They've got to be getting something out of it, right. Whether it's options or future rewards, financial rewards, or at least feeling good about what they're doing. It is informal, at least in the beginning, but you still have to think about that.
Right.
That process.
Yeah, I remember that we did some research in that when we were getting started, and we struggled to find a resource that just said what was the right amount to be rewarding those people. Just what's the right amount of equity or stock. I mean, people that you reach out to will always ask for more than you're able to give them. So what keeps them engaged and involved? And then from a marketing and branding perspective, are you looking for people with a Rolodex to help you? Because in addition to the capabilities and the experiences they just have friends, and so we gained a huge amount of value from folks who could just hook us up on multiple levels. Not just sort of introing and getting us into the door, but connecting us with the influencers. That's a whole other topic right there. Is just the power of the social media world on building a brand. Maybe we go there next, but to find advisors who can jumpstart that effort is critical.
Yeah, one of the questions that I got, Ian, from some of my students was, and I think it kind of relates to this, is should I try to look like a big brand right from the beginning? I mean, it's pretty easy to go out and make yourself look pretty big and pretty special. And that I thought that was kind of an interesting question. Basically, the student said, should I try to act like a big brand when I'm just getting started, or should I appear like a startup? Do you have a thought on that?
I do. I find the word "we" hilarious sometimes in early stages of a company. Where like, we'll take a look at that and we'll do this. I'm like, wait, who's we? I just literally, I just see you right now. And so I think there's certainly a value. You should always be punching above your weight. You should always be aspiring to be nipping at the heels of big incumbents in the space, because you can do better, you can be more agile. Maybe you came from one of those organizations and you know that your bill rates are more attractive and your capabilities are just on point. But customers should be treated as partners, and so you should always be genuine with them. And I think it's actually interesting. There's very cultural nuance to this answer too, because in certain cultures, they are totally cool and comfortable with you being a startup and being a smaller organization. And some, they are very hesitant or resistant, or it's just a risk mitigation thing where they're just worried that you might not be around tomorrow. So they'll inform their buying decision based on your size, scale, and whether you're a going concern. But as far as do you pretend to be bigger than you are, I think you give them the confidence that you are going to be you're going places, and they're investing in a trajectory, and they've got the right talent, but you don't present that you've got more boots on the ground than you do, because what a web we weave when we set out to deceive. It'll end up catching up with you at some point, and it won't be well received.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think there's lots of small things you can do. One of my friends was actually the co-founder of Jiffy Lube. And it's a great story, but Jiffy Lube was originally just this small little shop out in the Midwest. And Steve Spinelli, who's a friend of mine, he's now president at Babson College, was one of the co-founders. And they went out west really looking for windmills. They were a business, Don Quixote, I guess, but they were looking for, they were going to start a business around windmills, decided that wasn't going to work. And driving back, they saw this little, car lube facility, and they had this process, and they'd figured it out, and they actually bought it. And he said on the first day of their owning the company, they named it Jiffy Lube International, and they had big plans. Like you said, they had big plans. They didn't deceive anybody about what they were, but they had big plans. So, I
love that story. That's market research. That's flexibility and pivoting from plan A to plan B. That's all of it. And that's funny. Yeah, we when we named our company, we actually started in England, but we opened up branches relatively quickly around the world, and it presents all sorts of challenges, because you got to start building your brand in each one of those markets. You've got to stay. We were lucky that we didn't pivot too much, so we were able to stick to our knitting and build a brand around what it is we started doing, which is lucky, because it's a very focused industry. So everyone would have known that we were pivoting, and probably would have judged us for that. Although again, some people are very comfortable with entrepreneurs taking risks and evolving as per the market's needs from them.
Let me throw out a thought for conversation. Over the years, I've had a number of experiences that has led me to believe that one great way to build a brand is around being an expert. And we did this with Risk Aware. My colleague and I were both university professors, so we began to do research in the space of risk, university risk. I worked with a great pharmaceutical guy in Cincinnati who actually his company was the company that marketed and distributed Adderall for attention deficit disorders. So they became experts in that space. And I think I've shared with you a story. One of my first jobs was working for a solid waste engineering firm, and we basically designed landfills. So, our slogan was inside our in-house. Our slogan was "Your trash is our cash." But we were landfill designers at a time when people were moving from dumps basically to more professionally managed landfills. So the principal owner of the company decided that he wanted to become the expert. So became involved in writing the legislation surrounding it. And what do you think about content and building content and becoming the expert in a space as a way to build brand for an entrepreneur?
I think today more so than ever. I mean, it was always a good strategy. It's a tremendous strategy, and today more so than ever, it is the strategy. Because I'll give two different answers to two different concepts in the same answer. But the internet, social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, all of these different online academies out there that need and are hungry for content, the ease at which you can publish your own book, all of that lends to the validity of the idea of becoming an expert in a topic, and people give credence to an expert, especially if they've seen you, heard of your name. You walk into any room, especially if you're prospecting and trying to build your company. You walk into that room already with points on your side, right? They already have a degree of deference to you and what you say because you've earned it, because you have put yourself out there as having done the research. Sometimes it can be as simple as you've just framed the way people think about the topic that they're trying to understand themselves. Just simple frameworks, never mind all the way to the end of putting together complex legislation, which is a whole other level of expertise. So I could not endorse more strongly the idea of being seen as an expert, spending your time putting content out. Sometimes it's exhausting, but a lot of times there's all sorts of theories and approaches, and some that I use and that you and I both have, as far as if you put a podcast together, it's free form. It's you doing your best to keep a message on point, but then can be turned into 1,000 different things afterwards, from sound bites to memes to blogs to pics on Instagram. And that builds a brand a whole lot more easily and more convincingly than, hey, what can I do to get you in this product today? Because people they smell a sales pitch coming from 1,000 miles away, but they appreciate and respect expertise.
I've been so impressed with what you're doing at Sykes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. This is it sounds like a sales pitch. I was hesitating to go a sales pitch route, but you're right. Absolutely. I mean, when we got started, so I'll background context, back up 6 years. When we got started in the startup, which was a consultancy that helps enterprises deploy automation software. And it was early days in the space. And so we were quick to grab onto that, the role of being one, there are many, but being one of the experts, publishing blogs, playing with video early on for our industry, putting out courses on LinkedIn Learning that still are the defining courses, the seminal ones on what is robotic process automation in this case. And so I saw firsthand just how much that helped us, so that when I joined Sykes, we're doing that, but at a greater scale. This is the beauty of all of a sudden having more resources and not having to bootstrap everything. So to allude back to this, but having done all of the early work on it, it was easier to sort of frame that vision of what it is we were going for. But so we're working together on this concept of Sykes Institute, Sykes Enterprises Institute, rather than the Sykes School of Business, but doing it with Sykes, the school, having our own intellectual property, doing our own surveys as to how people are viewing the future of work and augmentation with software, or interaction with new fintech or telehealth, telemedicine applications and services. Part of it was I told the group I don't want to be quoting all the other consultancies. Right? They did their work coming up with their own data for a good reason, and it keeps working. We keep quoting them. So I'd really like it if we had our own data and our own perspective, because we certainly have our own experience. So Sykes Institute is there doing that. We are publishing a quarterly newsletter in which we're showing off expertise, never selling, absolutely never talking about products or what we can do, using and calling upon expertise that we've gained by delivering. So it's certainly clear, hopefully, that we know what we're talking about, because we've sold something in the past, but the content we're putting out is there to be educational and hopefully useful to whomever picks it up. So thank you for allowing me to expand on that. But I'm really proud of this strategy that is wholly focused on content and creating experts, because this is another topic, but people buy from people. When people interact with people, they don't necessarily have an affinity necessarily to buy from a brand. They buy from a brand because they trust the people who are in it, especially at a startup. You, as the entrepreneur, you are the product, you are the service, you are the everything of that company.
Yeah, so true. And I think even in a public company like Sykes, it's still about people always. And I think that's such great advice. And I think it's so impressive what you're doing. And I think there are great lessons in that for the startup, because it does go back to, I think being an entrepreneur and being in business really is a learning process all the time. Think of all the things that you're learning and all the data you're collecting. And so as I love that you're willing to package it up and share it. And it's the other cool thing I want to mention is it's cool for me. It's exciting to be part of the Sykes College of Business, working with you at Sykes on this, because it's really very cool.
Well, and to double down on the cool concept of what you're doing. I mean, you've touched on it, from everything from having your students and exposing them to your expertise and background and your research, hosting these incubators and making them do the tough work of the assessments. Honestly, first of all, that is, all of those are critical components to getting any entrepreneur off the ground. And I get a kick about I get a kick out of origin stories, because I think a lot of times origin stories are architected after the fact to sound just more raw and more exciting. I don't think as many companies got started in garages as say that they did, but it makes a heck of a good story. But what you're doing with your students, and we're all into reality TV these days. I mean, it should be the documentary. Everyone should be filming every ounce of themselves in that exploration. And the despair of doubting the idea and then evolving it, and then finding that spark of inspiration to come up with the next idea that ends up being the one. All of that makes good TV. Yeah. And all of that makes them, your students, not only content experts in the field of their startup, but content experts in the making of the startup, the origin story. So I guess I'll wrap that fascination with what you do up with a question and say, how do you encourage your students to document their journey and to share it both with you, but with the market as a whole, if they find that spark and that idea?
Well, first of all, thank you for throwing down the gauntlet, because that's not something that we probably do enough. But after today and this conversation, I think it needs to become a part of what we do and what they do. And we've got, we actually, amazingly, great minds think alike, but we did just have a conversation talking about this very thing, and we have somebody that's a student that's actually does this kind of documentary work.
Right.
And that's what prompted it. Was what we were thinking was having him document his experience and everybody else's in this peer-to-peer learning environment. Yeah. And so, we haven't been doing it. You threw down the gauntlet here. Everybody heard it first here. We're going to do it.
That's right.
I appreciate you doing that.
Well, I've seen one of the videos of that student, and it's, first of all, it's a great and inspiring video about their journey and what they gained from their time with you at the school. But I mean, beyond simply, and I've got 2 young children, and beyond simply being digital natives, which everyone is, and accelerated even more so now that everyone was sent home to do digital learning. You've got 8-year-olds struggling through a Zoom classroom situations. But beyond simply being digital natives, I think our children are sort of narrative natives. They are just naturally able to tell stories and do so with the production studio in their parents' pocket that they keep stealing and and running away with. And so every student who's in school these days, and obviously more so as my 8-year-old ends up as a student in your program, has been born to do this. They've done it ever since they picked up a phone and started to take silly pictures of themselves or their dog, or started to film their sister doing cartwheels in the living room. It's natural, it's there. And I think we need to, the new entrepreneurs would be wise to tap into that narrative native DNA that they've got, because I think that makes for incredible content and a really compelling foundation to any branding and marketing strategy.
Yeah, I agree completely. People remember stories. There's a great book called Talk Like Ted, and I can't remember the author's name right now, but I read it, and it was, he talks about the power of stories. And if you listen to TED Talks, that's one of the key things. I think we're running close on time, Ian. I could sit and talk all day. I'm gonna summarize a little bit and then turn it over to you to summarize too. It seems to me we've talked about the importance of research, doing your research and listening to your customer, and the importance of sales, and the possibility of using content and becoming an expert in your field, and in building brand. And I know you can add to that, but I think it's a personal journey for an entrepreneur. It's going to be unique to each company.
Totally agree. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your time, and again, Synapse, for this opportunity. I would just add, again, as you said, content, embrace the lean times, the lean stage, as you are forced to wear lots of hats, because only in so doing do you appreciate the importance of each one of them. Always look for advice and support and education. If you're lucky enough to have someone like Rebecca as your professor, take great notes and pay absolute attention, because every one of those lessons is going to help you in some way or another. And then I guess, again, plant lots of seeds, because you never know when they might germinate and grow, and you never know when you might harvest them. So build your network, reach out to lots of people, always be reaching back out, thanking all of those potential customers that you interviewed for the ideas, because they could become your first breakthrough customer. And always be building brand. There's no better time than now, because the internet, as silly as that sounds, is the most powerful tool we have available, and I've loved exploring how to use it myself, and I know that we both use it for the sake of our podcasts, and any entrepreneur should do the same.
Yeah, great advice.
There we go. So thank you, everybody, and as you said, Rebecca, our time's up. I'm sure we'll have our contact information sort of somewhere. That's where we always say, like, follow us, link up.
Yeah.
But it would be our honor to be a resource and to advise the budding entrepreneur on how to both hone their craft and to build their brand as they grow their idea.
Yes, thank you, Ian. Great advice.